Hello and welcome, I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching NewsX World. Let's dive into the top stories this hour. The United Kingdom and 27 other nations have urged an immediate end to the war in Gaza, condemning Israel's aid blockades and civilian deaths. Israel responds and calls the statement disconnected from reality. Local health authorities report that at least 12 Palestinians were killed and dozens were wounded by Israeli tank shells fired at tents housing displaced families in Gaza City. The strike occurred north of the Shafti refugee camp. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi will depart tomorrow to meet UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer and King Charles III, according to Foreign Secretary Vikram Misri. The visit aims to bolster bilateral cooperation in trade, climate and defence. Ukrainian President Zelensky says fresh peace talks with Russia will begin tomorrow in Turkey, the first in nearly 2 months. The Kremlin says both sides will still hold diametrically opposed positions. The death toll rises to 27 in the Bangladesh Air Force trainer crash, according to the Special Assistant to the Chief Advisor for Health. The plane slammed into a school and college in Dhaka, leaving dozens more injured and hospitalised with burns. Pakistan's disaster agency says 221 people, including 104 children, have died in rain-related incidents since June of the 26th. Over 500 others have been injured as heavy monsoon rains continue to wreak havoc across the country. Yemen's Houthi rebels say they fired a hypersonic ballistic missile at Israel's main airport on Tuesday, marking the second attack in 24 hours. Israel's military confirmed it intercepted the missile aimed at Ben Gurion Airport. Iran's nuclear deputy foreign minister Kazem Karabida-Badi said that reimposing international sanctions would further complicate the nuclear standoff. His warning comes ahead of Friday's talks with Britain, France and Germany in Istanbul. We start our bulletin in South America, where Brazilian President Lula da Silva has said that a tariff war could erupt at any time if the United States persists in imposing trade barriers on Brazilian goods. This comes after U.S. President Donald Trump unilaterally announced on July the 9th, a 50% tariff on Brazilian imports starting on August the 1st. Since then, Brazil has repeatedly said it will take reciprocal measures if negotiations cannot resolve the issue. Lula has called Trump's reasons for increasing tariffs inadequate and claimed that Trump has insufficient understanding of the situation. Let's take a closer look at what the Brazilian president had to say.
Nós não estamos numa guerra tarifária. Guerra tarifária vai começar na hora que eu der a resposta ao Trump, se não mudar de opinião, porque as condições que o Trump impôs não foram condições adequadas. Também foi a falta de conhecimento do presidente Trump sobre a questão do superávit comercial. Ou seja, o Brasil tem déficit de 410 bilhões de dólares em 15.
We're now joined by Peter Cordillo, who's a chief market economist at Spartan Capital Securities. He joins us live from New York. Peter, thank you very much for joining us on the program. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about why Donald Trump has hit Brazil with such a high tariff, 50%.
Well, I don't think he's hit only Brazil. He's threatened, let's say, other nations as well, and that is his way of trying to get a deal. Now, we saw the response from the Brazilian president, which basically she called it blackmail, and of course. That only heats up the situation. But I kind of think that that's probably what these steep tariffs are all about, to heat up the situation, to get dialogue going, and to try to reach to an agreement that will not, where the United States will not impose such steep tariffs. I think that's what we're headed. Now, again, that doesn't mean that we are not, that, August 1st rolls around and that these steep tariffs go into effect. I think that's probably going to be the case for most countries. But then I think that opens the path for serious negotiations. And hopefully then the negotiations will bring lower tariffs. Now, there's another scenario, and of course that is if Brazil and other nations decide to play hardball, that means that the trade war would expand for a longer period of time, and that would be negative for the global economies, negative for the global market. So I think the aim here is to try and negotiate a deal that can be acceptable to the United States and to whomever country they are negotiating with.
Peter, the World Trade Organization has expressed concerns about Donald Trump's tariff policy. Is there a role for the World Trade Organization to step in and mediate this dispute?
I don't think so. Trump doesn't have much regard for institutions, and he does things the way he wants to do them. So I don't think that'll be the case. I mean, they can try. Will they achieve some mediation? I doubt it. I think everyone knows. All heads of governments know, and even the markets know that Trump chooses to deal in this manner. And so the question is, do they cave in? Who caves in first? Or just will there be a mutual agreement? And as I said before, I think that a mutual agreement is likely. It may not happen, again, it may not happen on August the 1st. It might go in towards the end of August, perhaps even to the end of September. But when the economies begin to suffer, somebody has to blink first.
Indeed, Peter. Obviously, Lula's language has been quite aggressive towards the American president. This also came with the likes of Mark Carney. What levers do Lula and Trump have to do right now to de-escalate these tensions, if they're going to happen? Do you suspect that they will?
Well, like I said, I think it'll probably get worse before it gets better. And then at one point or another, someone will blink and they will come with some sort of a solution. We said this time and time again, Trump takes an aggressive position, and that position is the way he feels that nations, that other governments, I should say, will eventually come to some sort of an agreement. So it's just a question of, at this point, to wait and see. Does this mean that the rhetoric back and forth, whether it be from Brazil, whether it be from the EU, whether it be from Canada, whether it be from Mexico, does that mean that this rhetoric is going to tame down? No, I don't think so. It's probably going to get worse as we get closer.
Peter, as we know, the United States is the biggest economy in the world. However, what cards can Brazil play in this possible soon-to-be trade war?
Well, look, we probably could outlast anyone. There's only one problem, and that is the inflation, the inflationary aspect of tariffs. And that's the reason why the Federal Reserve has yet to cut interest rates. They're waiting to see what the inflation aspect of the tariffs will bring. Some might be very light, others might be very heavy. So how does that impact U.S. economy? Well, from a trade viewpoint, Nothing much, really nothing much changes, other than the fact that these higher tariffs will bring inflation, and the cost of the products will be passed on to the consumer. So that means the Fed may not be too generous in cutting rates or cutting rates at all. And so that's harmful for the economy. That's how the United States will endure a suffering from a prolonged trade war.
Peter Cordillo, thank you very much for your insight and for joining us on the programme. We now move on to the Middle East, where Israeli tank shelling has killed at least 12 Palestinians in a tent camp in western Gaza City, according to local health officials. Medics say tanks north of Shati refugee camp fired 2 shells at tents sheltering displaced families. Dozens were also injured in the strike. The Israeli military has not yet commented on the incident. However, the attacks come amid ongoing military operations across the Gaza Strip. Casualties continue to rise as civilians face intense fire near aid zones. Let's now move east, where an official investigation in China has uncovered a disturbing cover-up of a lead poisoning case that sickened hundreds of children in the northwest. Dozens of provincial capitals and hospital staff are accused of tampering with blood tests, attempting to conceal the extent of the poisoning at Peksin Kindergarten in Tianshu City and Gansu Province. Gansu provincial authorities also revealed that city officials accepted bribes from an investor linked to Peksin, neglecting essential food safety inspections at several preschools. Moreover, the kindergarten chefs reportedly used inedible paint to make meals appear more appealing. Food samples later revealed lead levels above 2,000 times above the national safety limit. 8 people were initially detained for their involvement in producing the toxic snacks. 6 of them included the kindergarten's principal, cooks, and an investor have been arrested according to the report. Furthermore, 10 other officials will face formal accounting procedures, while another 17 people are under disciplinary investigation. As of July the 20th, 234 children have been discharged from the hospital after receiving treatment for lead poisoning, which began when students ate contaminated cakes and buns. We're now joined by Andrew K.P. Lung, who's a China strategist located in London. Thank you very much, Andrew, for joining us on this topic. Andrew, this is quite a disturbing case. What more information can you tell us about it that we already know?
Well, this is not an isolated case in terms of decades of China's development in recent years. And then some years back, there was also a big scandal, a food scandal. But this goes into the heart of President Xi's people-based governance. So I think the presidency would be extremely angry about what the officials and other perpetrators involved in this crime. And no doubt harsh punishments would be meted out. Because I think the presidency is pivoting towards common prosperity and a different path from what happened before, letting a few people get rich first under the previous leader, Deng Xiaoping. Because that in the train, in return for breakneck growth, what comes afterwards is also scandals like this, pollution, and also uneven distribution of wealth, uneven distribution of developments. And that's what presidency is trying to build, is a more equitable society. Not only between people in the same city, but between provinces and between regions, so as to stabilize the country and focus the country's energy towards a higher plane, making China wealthier and richer and more influential to realize the China dream. And so very stringent regulations and policies have been enacted over the past decade or so to cram down on scandals like this, because there are always people in some private businesses trying to shortchange the kind of regulations. But let's be fair, I mean, that's not only happening in China, that's happening in other countries as well, India included, and also a lot of developing countries, and even in advanced countries. But I think in China, it has a historic and also a strategic importance, cracking down on the kind of ill practices that impact on the livelihood and the health and the well-being of the people, but also corruption. Corruption is a big thing, and it's still carrying on and even accelerated in recent years under President Xi, targeting corruption in even high places, and even reaching the highest level in the Chinese Communist Party's governance, in the 7 or the 10 members of the standing committee of the Politburo, but all down the line to governors, the party secretaries, to municipalities, and even villages. So I think that this case highlights a lot of the strategic emphasis under President Xi's leadership to move the country towards a more equitable phase of development, more mindful of people's well-being, particularly in health and safety.
Yes, Andrew KP Lung, please stay with us as we discuss another story from the region. China's foreign ministry says it has no information to share on reports that a U.S. Commerce Department staff member is under an exit ban. Beijing claims all entry and exit matters follow Chinese law. The U.S. State Department confirms a patent office employee was blocked from leaving while visiting family. The incident comes amid growing tensions between Washington and Beijing. Exit plans in China have been used on foreign nationals before, often in civil or criminal cases or as diplomatic leverage. Andrew, these reports came out this morning that a U.S. Worker was not allowed to leave Beijing. What more can you tell us about this situation, which Beijing has now responded to?
Whenever the China's state organ saying that there is no information to provide on a high-profile case like this, that means there's some sort of investigations that's been going on, and either in terms of usually connected with national security, leakage of state secrets, or kind of espionage. Now, let's be fair. I mean, espionage happening not only in China, but in other countries, in Western countries. The high-profile case, I'm not saying that this is necessarily a high-profile case, but just for comparison, a well-known case, for example, the Julian Assange, the WikiLeaks personality. So I think that this kind of state regulations on leakage of state secrets, espionage, happens all the time, and this is possibly one of these cases.
Yes, Andrew, and how significant is using an exit ban as diplomatic leverage against U.S. personnel?
Well, as I said, I mean, it was a question of espionage, a question of national security. There's a common tactic used not only by China, but other nations as well. I mean, for example, if someone is caught in espionage under the national security law in the U.S. or in other countries, or in India or in the U.K., that person may not be allowed to leave. I mean, that's no price guessing, you know, sort of, that's because the investigation is going on. So I think that this is not a big surprise if someone is caught with sufficient evidence to at least permit further investigations, that individual usually is not allowed to leave the country. And that happens not only in China, but in other countries as well.
Yes, Andrew KP Lung, thank you very much for your insight on the programme. We now move over to Europe, and according to reports, foreign mercenaries from several countries have been present in Ukraine, training alongside Ukrainian forces. A captured Ukrainian soldier, Anatoly Strangialo, of the 47th Separate Merchandise Brigade, said in a video released by the Russian Defense Ministry that he encountered mercenaries from Japan, Colombia, Poland, Ireland, the United States and Germany at a training center in Cherkasy region. Stagalio stated that some of these foreign fighters trained together with Ukrainian soldiers before being deployed to the Sumy region. He surrendered to Russian forces after being targeted by a Ukrainian FPV drone. These claims have not been independently verified. Foreign volunteers and contractors have reported in the conflict, but their exact roles remain unclear. We're now joined... We now move to another related development where, according to reports, a group of Latin American mercenaries deployed to the front line in Alexandriograd, Donetsk People's Republic, fled to the area within a day. A source in Russian defense circles told TASS that the mercenaries retreated chaotically, abandoning their positions amid ongoing Russian precision strikes. They were also targeted by Russian FPV drone attacks during their withdrawal. The Ukrainian military reportedly sent this group of Latin American mercenaries to the region on July the 21st. These claims have also not been independently verified. We're now joined by our reporter, anchor and correspondent, Joshua Barnes. Joshua, what more can you tell us about this?
Well, yes, Thomas, let's put some context on this situation here. Since the start of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, volunteers and mercenaries have been involved in fighting. Having been in Europe myself when the war started, there was a lot of conversation around people signing up to fight with Ukraine after the first initial move from Russia expanding into Ukraine in an initial push in the first few days, aiming to reach Kyiv, the capital of Ukraine. This, of course, is a situation that has continued, while not regularly reported as it was initially in the first months of the war. This is a situation that is ongoing. I want to take away from parallels that may be drawn with troop deployment coming from North Korea. When you hear of foreign fighters in a war, it can be easy to draw parallels, but there is a clear difference here. These mercenaries and these volunteers that are fighting with Ukraine, being trained with Ukrainian army forces, are smaller groups, potentially even just single lone volunteers who are wanting to fight, whether they have military backgrounds or whether they want to contribute to medical efforts or etc. So that is different to the situation in North Korea, where tens of thousands of troops are reportedly being sent to fight alongside Russia on the front lines. I think that context is important in a war that, of course, is still waging on. There is talk around a ceasefire, and I'm sure we may come to that, but this report that we're hearing is not new. Also, it's important to acknowledge that TASS is a Russian news agency. It hasn't been verified, as you mentioned, the number of mercenaries who have been fighting, but this has been going on for a war which is now into its fourth year.
Yes, Joshua, thank you very much for joining us. We now move once again, where a North Korean delegation of all female officials has left Pyongyang to visit Russia. Russia's ambassador to North Korea, Alexander Matiskora, and Pyongyang officials were seen sending off the delegation led by the director of the Central Committee of the Workers' Party of Korea, Kim Jong-sun. The KCNA did not disclose the purpose of the visit, but the trip appears aimed at discussing bilateral cooperation with Russian women's organizations as it comes amid growing bilateral cooperation between the two countries across various fields. Torrential monsoon rains continue to lash the Philippines, submerging parts of the capital and surrounding provinces underneath waist-deep floodwaters. The severe weather forced a second day of school closures, flight cancellations and government work suspensions. In Metro Manila and nearby areas, residents wading through flooded streets were evacuated to temporary shelters as water levels rose overnight. Philippines flooding displaced thousands, leaving 2 missing, according to the National Disaster Agency. Thousands remain in evacuation centres with relentless rains intensified by tropical storm Krising and 2 new low-pressure areas threatening further downpours. Meanwhile, President Ferdinand Marcos Jr., who is currently visiting the United States, reassured citizens that all necessary government agencies have been mobilized to provide support and emergency relief to affected communities. Now we stay in the region. South Korea's President Lee Jae-myung has ordered an all-out effort to find missing persons after days of torrential rains caused by deadly floods and landslides. At least 19 people are dead and 9 are still missing, with over 2,500 being displaced. Lee has urged officials to act fast and warned against negligence. He also called for a new disaster response system. The president's approval rating has dipped slightly, and criticism over the government's handling of the crisis. Now let's take a look at some stories from the world of business. Japan's Nikkei index rose 1.1% to 40,241.61 as markets welcomed the expected outcome of the upper house election. Despite Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba's ruling coalition losing control, investors were reassured by political stability and Ishiba's pledge to stay on. Gains were made by SoftBank, Mitsubishi, heavy industries and chip makers like Advanced. Olympus dropped 2%, pulling the index down. However, analysts say the result won't shake Japan's policy framework in the short term. Universal Music Group, home to stars like Taylor Swift and Drake, has filed confidentially to sell shares in the US, aiming to tap into surging US equity markets. Already valued at nearly $50 billion on the Dutch exchange, euros, UMG is exploring a secondary listing as the S&P 500 and Nasdaq hit a fresh record high. The exact size of the offering is unknown. Backed by major investors Bill Ackman, UMG's move signals confidence in US investor appetite and is seen as a strategic expansion into the world's top capital market. Stellantis posted a €2.3 billion net loss for the first half of 2025, citing mounting costs from US tariffs imposed by US President Trump. The car maker behind brands like Jeep and Peugeot says tariffs have already cost €300 million and warned that the impact could more than double in the second half. CFO Doug Osterman projects full-year tariff losses between €1 to €1.5 billion unless conditions change. The group also reported €3.3 billion in pre-tax charges as it faces strategic revamps under new CEO Antonio Filosa in Europe and the United States. JSW MG Motor India has unveiled the MG M9, a luxury MPV branded as the presidential limousine, priced at $69,000, launched via the company's premium channel MG Select. The M9 is designed to blend sophistication, comfort and innovation for high-end buyers. Positioned as a flagship of indulgence, the M9 targets elite clientele with a focus on luxury mobility. Deliveries begin on August the 10th. Microsoft has issued urgent security patches after detecting active cyber attacks targeting its widely used SharePoint collaboration software. The vulnerability allows unauthenticated access, letting hackers execute code and steal data from compromised systems. The U.S Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency warned that the breach poses a serious risk to global organizations. Microsoft has released fixes for affected versions, including a patch for SharePoint Server 2016. Meanwhile, researchers at Palo Alto Networks say thousands of entities may have been hit, urging immediate action. Well, that's all we have time for. We will continue to bring you more news updates from around the world. Thank you.